Pastor David Lancaster was a beloved man in the small town of Maple Ridge, Georgia. He was the senior pastor of Grace Fellowship Church, a congregation of over 800 members. Known for his magnetic sermons and heartfelt outreach, Pastor David was the town's spiritual anchor. He wore his tailored suits with grace, spoke with conviction, and offered words that soothed the most broken souls. Born into a devout Christian family, David had always felt called to ministry. After earning his Master of Divinity from Emory University, he returned to Maple Ridge and took up his position at Grace Fellowship. At just 36, he was respected beyond his years. People called him a vessel of the Lord. But beneath his spiritual glow hid desires he never fully confessed to anyone. Jessica Lancaster, David's wife, was the epitome of grace and elegance. A registered nurse at Maple Ridge General Hospital, she was known for her quiet strength, warm smile, and tireless care for her patients. At 33, she balanced her career, her marriage, and church responsibilities flawlessly. Jessica met David while attending a church revival during her college years. She was drawn to his fire for God and his powerful voice. They married 2 years later in a grand church wedding. Jessica had always dreamed of building a life rooted in faith. David seemed like the answer to her prayers. Their love was a symbol of hope to many. Samantha Pierce was a single mother in her late 20s who had recently started working as the church secretary. A former community college student with a background in business administration, Samantha had been trying to turn her life around after a rocky past. She met Pastor David during a church outreach program where she volunteered. Her diligence and charm caught his attention, and he offered her a part-time position that later turned full-time. Over time, Samantha developed feelings she tried to suppress, feelings that were ignited by Pastor David's compliments and subtle flirtations. Before we dive deeper into this chilling story of betrayal, secrets, and murder, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another dark and twisted tale. If you're ready for the truth behind the pulpit, let's continue. What started as innocent conversations about sermon schedules and church bulletins gradually turned into longer talks, casual lunches, and late-night texts. David found in Samantha a listener who didn't expect him to be perfect. She was refreshing, younger, and admired him without spiritual expectations. Samantha, on the other hand, felt seen in ways she hadn't in years. Pastor David praised her ideas, her looks, and made her feel worthy. She knew it was wrong, but her loneliness was louder than her guilt. Their connection deepened, unseen behind the pulpit and undetected by the faithful. Jessica began to notice the change. David was distracted, coming home later, and showing less interest in their baby's progress. She was 6 months pregnant, glowing with anticipation, but he barely touched her anymore. One evening, she found a text on his phone from Samantha that read, "I miss you already." Jessica's heart sank. She didn't confront him immediately. Instead, she prayed and hoped she was wrong. But her instincts told her otherwise. Jessica turned to her best friend, Leanne, a fellow nurse and devout believer. Tearfully, she confided her fears. Leanne urged her to speak to David and suggested counseling. Jessica wasn't ready to break the image of their perfect union just yet. Instead, Jessica increased her church activities, hoping proximity would rekindle their bond. She joined the women's ministry and even started planning a special dedication ceremony for their unborn child. But David remained distant, preoccupied with secret thoughts and forbidden moments. One rainy evening, after a church board meeting, David offered Samantha a ride home. The drive was filled with silence, heavy with unspoken words. When they reached her apartment, David leaned in and kissed her. Samantha didn't pull away. That kiss marked the beginning of something that couldn't be undone. The man of God and the woman searching for redemption had crossed a sacred line. David was drowning in guilt, but the thrill was overpowering. He justified it as emotional need, a mistake he could manage. From that night on, David led a double life. By day, he was the pastor preaching about faithfulness. By night, he was a man indulging in a sinful affair. He told himself it was temporary, that he'd end it soon, that he still loved Jessica. But lies multiplied, secret rendezvous, hidden messages, and growing paranoia consumed him. Jessica felt more alone than ever. her pregnancy now a reminder of how distant her husband had become. 2 months into the affair, Samantha missed her period. She took a test. It was positive. Panic washed over her. She knew David wouldn't leave Jessica, especially not with a baby on the way. When she told him, David was stunned. He told her to keep quiet, to give him time. He was desperate, conflicted, and overwhelmed. Samantha felt discarded and used. But deep inside, she still believed he'd choose her. Jessica finally confronted David one evening. She asked if he was having an affair. He denied it, then blamed stress, then finally walked out without a word. That night, Jessica cried herself to sleep. In the following days, she contacted a marriage counselor. David refused to go. He grew cold, distant, and even hostile. Jessica didn't know that David was contemplating something far darker than divorce. David sat in his office late one night, staring at the framed photo of his wedding day. His hands trembled. The image of Samantha's positive pregnancy test haunted him. He felt his world closing in. His sermons lost their passion, and he began skipping meetings. He imagined the disgrace, the ruined reputation, and the shame of losing his congregation. The pressure was suffocating. Instead of turning to God, he began researching options that no righteous man should ever consider. Darkness was settling into his soul. Samantha was growing anxious. She began texting and calling David constantly. She wanted answers. She wanted a plan. She threatened to tell Jessica if he didn't make a decision soon. Her desperation was evident, and David found it increasingly difficult to manage her. He promised her money, support, and secrecy, but no commitment. Samantha began to feel abandoned. She had imagined a new life with him. Instead, she found herself alone, pregnant, and emotionally wrecked. Jessica sensed something darker was afoot. Despite David's evasiveness, she tried to hold the family together. She focused on preparing the nursery, praying for a miracle, and holding on to her faith. Her journal entries became more emotional, filled with pleas to God for strength and clarity. She began documenting David's behavior, his absences, mood swings, and moments of cruelty. Deep down, she feared the worst. But never did she imagine the true extent of his betrayal, or the danger it posed. One Sunday after service, Samantha cornered David in his office. Tearfully, she told him she couldn't carry the burden alone anymore. She was going to tell Jessica. She wanted to come clean, believing honesty was the only path forward. David panicked. He begged her not to. He told her it would destroy everything, not just his family, but the church. Samantha gave him 1 week to come clean or she would do it herself. That deadline became the countdown to a tragedy. David spent the next few days in torment. He barely slept. His sermons became hollow, mechanical. He began distancing himself from everyone. One night, he took a long walk through the woods near their home, consumed by a single question. What if there were no one to confess to? He began to rationalize the unthinkable. He told himself it was the only way to protect the church, his reputation, and even Samantha's future. Evil, once unthinkable, now seemed like twisted salvation. The mask of righteousness cracked. On a chilly Thursday morning, Jessica woke early to make breakfast. David appeared calm, composed, eerily so. He helped her carry boxes into the nursery. He kissed her on the forehead. Jessica felt a flicker of hope. Later that day, David suggested they take a walk in the woods behind their house, something they hadn't done in months. Jessica agreed, touched by the gesture. She saw it as a sign of healing. She never returned. David returned home alone. He claimed Jessica had wandered off and gotten lost. A massive search ensued. Volunteers, police, and dogs combed the woods for days. But Jessica, 6 months pregnant, was gone. David gave tearful interviews, pleaded with the public, and led prayer vigils at the church. His performance was convincing. But behind closed doors, Samantha watched with suspicion and horror. Detectives grew suspicious. David's story had inconsistencies. Jessica's journals hinted at marital trouble. And when investigators found David's burner phone, filled with messages to Samantha, the web of lies began to unravel. Samantha was brought in for questioning. She broke down. She told the detectives everything, about the affair, the pregnancy, the threats. And she admitted, she feared David had done something terrible. David was arrested 2 weeks later. He was charged with the murder of Jessica Lancaster and her unborn child. The town of Maple Ridge was stunned. The beloved pastor, now a symbol of betrayal and evil, sat behind bars. The church congregation split. Some refused to believe it. Others demanded justice. Jessica's parents, devastated, took custody of her journal, using her words as a legacy of truth. The courtroom was packed. Media swarmed the small town. The prosecution laid out a damning case: motive, affair, threats, lies, and journal entries. Samantha testified. Leanne testified. Even former church members turned against David. David's defense crumbled under the weight of evidence. In the end, the jury found him guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. David Lancaster, once a beacon of hope, now sat alone in a prison cell, his collar replaced by chains, his sermons silenced by the weight of his sins. Maple Ridge would never be the same. The stained glass windows of Grace Fellowship Church still glimmered in the morning light, but the pews were emptier, the choir quieter. A memorial bench sat in the church garden, engraved with Jessica's name and her unborn son, Elijah, a name she had written in her journal only once, in hope. Samantha gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Hope. Though she tried to leave Maple Ridge behind, whispers followed her. Some blamed her, others pitied her. She raised her daughter quietly, vowing to never speak the pastor's name again. David Lancaster spent his days in prison reading scripture he once preached but no longer believed. He wrote letters to no one, prayed to a God he feared had left him, and stared at the photo of Jessica taped to his cell wall. He never confessed. Jessica's parents sued the church and won a settlement, which they used to fund a domestic violence shelter in her name. The House of Grace opened a year later, offering refuge to women betrayed not by strangers, but by those who once vowed to love them. And in that quiet town, where sermons once echoed with conviction, now echoed a single, silent truth: even light can cast a deadly shadow. In his cold, gray cell, David Lancaster stared at the peeling wall and replayed every moment that led to his downfall. The silence was deafening. No more pulpit, no more applause, just the echo of choices that destroyed lives. He requested a Bible but struggled to read it. Every verse felt like judgment. He tried writing sermons in his head, but the guilt strangled every word. Jessica's parents, heartbroken but determined, released portions of her journal to the media. Her words painted a picture of strength, sorrow, and spiritual longing. The nation wept reading the private entries of a woman betrayed by love and faith. Talk shows discussed her case. Church groups held vigils. Jessica became a symbol of grace under fire. Samantha, now a single mother, faced judgment from all sides. Though she cooperated with the police, some blamed her for the tragedy. She lost her job, her home, and her peace of mind. She moved away, changed her name, and tried to raise her daughter away from the shadows of the past. But nightmares still came. Visions of Jessica, of what could have been, and what should have never happened. Grace Fellowship split in bitter division. Some members clung to denial, believing David had been framed. Others demanded justice and transparency. Leaders resigned. The sanctuary sat empty. Sermons once full of hope were now whispers of betrayal. Eventually, the church closed its doors, its final prayer a cry for healing. Maple Ridge changed. The scandal was too heavy, too public. Local businesses avoided talking about it. Newcomers asked questions no one wanted to answer. Jessica's old hospital wing was renamed in her memory. A small bench was placed in the town square with a plaque that read, "In loving memory of Jessica and Grace. May truth always rise." For months, David's parents stayed silent. But eventually, they gave a heart-wrenching interview. His mother sobbed, clutching a photo of David's ordination. "We raised him in the Word," she whispered. "But we couldn't raise him past his secrets." His father remained stone-faced, a man whose pride had turned to shame. Leanne, Jessica's best friend, became an advocate for pregnant women experiencing domestic betrayal and emotional abuse. She founded a nonprofit and began traveling the country, sharing Jessica's story. Her first speech ended with the words, "If love doesn't protect you, it's not love." Jessica learned too late. Let her story save someone else. 1 year after his conviction, David wrote a letter to Jessica's parents. It was 11 pages long. In it, he admitted to everything. He called it his confession, his final sermon. He begged for forgiveness, not from God, but from Jessica's unborn child. "I killed an innocent soul," he wrote, "and I'll live with that every day until my last breath." Jessica's parents never responded. Samantha's daughter turned 5 in a quiet town far from Maple Ridge. She never knew her father. But Samantha told her stories of strength, survival, and choosing truth over shame. Hope loved painting rainbows and asking big questions. One day, she would learn her story. But not yet. For now, she was just a little girl with a name born out of sorrow and hope. Years later, an anonymous audio surfaced online titled, "The Final Sermon of Pastor David Lancaster." It wasn't a sermon, it was a recording of his trial confession, mixed with old recordings of him preaching. It became a viral reminder of how easily power can mask brokenness. The last words of the tape were, "There is no pulpit in hell. Just echoes of the truth you refused to tell." If this story moved you, or shocked you, let us know your thoughts in the comments. What do you think drove Pastor David to commit the ultimate betrayal? Don't forget to like this video, share it with a true crime fan, and subscribe for more real-life crime stories that reveal the darkest parts of the human heart.